The 2025 Formula One Chinese Grand Prix produced quite the dull race, if I'm going to be honest. But luckily, the FIA had something to say about that with 3 disqualifications. The race also saw a McLaren 1-2, but maybe it's not as dominant as we think it is. Also, we saw Red Bull be in absolute crisis mode with Liam Lawson. Let's talk about all of that and more. Hello everybody, my name is Michael and welcome back to Last to First. Let's get right into things, and starting out with the 3 disqualifications. Absolute scenes after the race with these disqualifications. Starting out with Gasly, his car was found to be underweight, and that meant that him and Alpine are still the only team to not score any points yet, which is pretty crazy. Just overall though, it's pretty wild that they were found to be underweight, in this day and age with how much they are tracking everything, how much data the teams have access to. It's pretty crazy that they were underweight, and yeah, they were disqualified, and it was not such a good result for them. Otherwise, Gasly would have scored some points with the other disqualifications that we saw. Now, more importantly, the other 2 disqualifications were both of the Ferrari drivers. Absolute scenes coming out of Ferrari at this point in the season. They are having an absolute shocker to start things out. But Leclerc had an underweight car like Gasly, and then Hamilton had excessive wear on the plank. Now, it's one thing for a team to have a double disqualification. It's another thing for them to have a complete technical infringement like that. And it's an absolute other thing for the team to have 2 separate infringements to cause both of their cars to be disqualified from the race. Absolute insanity coming out of Ferrari. They are in absolute shambles at the moment. Australia was, of course, a really poor season opener for them. They just didn't quite have the pace in the race, as well as just made the wrong calls in the race in the wet, and it just started off really poorly. Fred Vasseur said that it was kind of a one-off and then they'll bounce back, and then boom, they did bounce back. Sprint pole and a sprint win from Lewis Hamilton, and then boom, they had not quite the same quali pace and race pace for the actual race when it really counted, and then boom, a double disqualification for them. I mean, the highs and lows of Ferrari are just absolute insane. Being a Ferrari fan is just a constant wave of emotions. It's pretty insane. But Ferrari, just as a whole, they are both a peaky team and a peaky car. They, as a team, have these highs from the sprint race and then these absolute lows of getting disqualified. They just seem to be absolutely everywhere right now, as well as the car just seems to be a bit everywhere at the moment. It seems to be quite peaky, and if it gets outside of the window, then it's not quite as competitive. If it is in the window, then it's winning the sprint race, and it's doing great in Friday practice of Australia. But as soon as it gets outside of that window, it seems to be down the order a bit. Now, in general, these ground effect cars are pretty peaky and they need to be in the right window, but the Ferrari just seems to be particularly peaky. We saw Mercedes be super peaky last year, and they've seemed to have ironed things out a little bit, but now Ferrari is just really everywhere. The team as a whole, they have some encouraging signs as well as some worrying signs, and they really need to get on top of things. They are already significantly down on points for the drivers as well as the Constructors' Championship, and if they are going to make a proper bid throughout the season, they need to get on top of things sooner rather than later. Some encouraging signs for Hamilton is that he is just generally performing better than he was at Mercedes, and he's starting to get a feel for this Ferrari car, which is good. Just unfortunately for him, Ferrari is just not as good of a team as Mercedes in terms of operations. I know Hamilton did have a disqualification, I believe was it last year or the year before, at the United States Grand Prix with Mercedes, but just generally speaking, Ferrari are just always more in shambles, whether it's with strategy or with getting disqualified like this. But still, nonetheless, overall, Hamilton is looking a lot better than he was at Mercedes. He really had the edge over Leclerc all weekend, right up until the actual race itself. But unfortunately for him, he did make some changes in regular qualifying in the race that kind of led him and Ferrari down the wrong path, and that led him to being slower than Leclerc in the race, despite Leclerc missing part of his front wing. Overall, though, it was, of course, a very encouraging weekend for Hamilton. He looked like vintage prime Hamilton Lawson in that sprint win and sprint pole, and it's just good to see him be able to actually take the challenge to Leclerc and see him starting to integrate better with that team and car and really show that he still has what it takes to be fighting at the front of things. But there's still certainly work to do, as Leclerc still did beat him in the race. These are worrying times for Ferrari right now, and Fred Vasseur really needs to steer the ship in the right direction because it is going into crisis mode like Red Bull, just for some slightly different reasons. Now, speaking of Red Bull, they truly are in crisis mode with their second driver, and they are in crisis more than they ever dreamed of with Perez or any of the other second drivers that they had before. Lawson is just performing so poorly right now. It's actually shocking, and it's quite the story to start off the season. He had some excuses in Melbourne. I was giving him a bit of a break. He had never raced there before. Crazy conditions, first race in the Red Bull. The Red Bull definitely isn't the fastest car right now, but this time out he doesn't really have any excuses. Yes, maybe he's not as familiar with the Shanghai circuit, but it still was a really shocking weekend for him. He had a double P20 in both qualifying sessions, and he really had no saving grace in the race. The sprint race was a bit better from him than the actual race, but the actual race was pretty horrendous from him again. The Red Bull certainly hasn't been and wasn't the quickest car today, but he needs to be scoring some type of points, especially when 3 drivers ahead of him were disqualified. The fact that he still didn't score any points is absolutely shocking. There are already, there was rumors after Australia about him getting swapped, but now the rumors are really going off the hinges about him being potentially swapped as soon as the next race in Japan, which is absolutely insane. I think it is still too early to swap out Lawson for somebody, but he definitely needs to step it up very quickly. Imagine how ridiculous it'll look if Red Bull do swap him and Yuki for the Japanese Grand Prix. It's just gonna make Red Bull look a fool. It'll be absolute scenes. To be fair, on merit, Yuki probably should have already been in that seat rather than Liam Lawson, but they chose to go with Liam overall, so they really do need to give him a bit more time than what they are giving him. At least a couple more races, I would think. But I understand them wanting to potentially swap the drivers already, because it's certainly been the worst second driver for Red Bull that they've had in ever, probably, but definitely in recent times it's been absolutely disastrous. The talk seems to be they're potentially swapping him for Suzuka, or potentially giving him the Japanese Grand Prix to at least show that he can do something, since he has spent a lot of time there in Super Formula, and it would be a track that he would be familiar and comfortable with. If they do give him next race and he has a similar result, then I think it might be time. The problem is that while Yuki probably on merit deserved to be in that seat over Lawson, I have no doubt that Yuki will get absolutely smoked and will suffer the same fate. I don't really think that Yuki is the right driver for that situation either. Maybe he will perform a bit better than Lawson, because Lawson's currently performing at the very bottom, so I guess you can only go up from here. But I think Yuki will not be able to handle the pressure of that team, but I very well could be wrong. He's performing at a very high level right now, and he at least deserves to have a shot at that team. I said it before and I'll say it again, if Red Bull would have just used their brains a little bit, they would have put Carlos Sainz in that car, and they would not be quite having the same problem. Now, Sainz is having some difficulties at Williams, but Sainz is a better driver than Yuki, Lawson, Perez, Gasly, and probably Albon, but still early days to see exactly how that all plays out. But yeah, Red Bull just continues to put themselves in the situation, and it's only getting trickier for them. If you made it this far into the video, please consider giving it a like and comment down below what you thought of the race, and what do you think should happen with Liam Lawson at Red Bull? Should they replace him, or should they give him a bit more time? Let me know down in the comments below. Really, post-race were the main talking points of the race, because it was not such a good race, but there are still things to talk about. And I want to talk on McLaren and their 1-2, and it not being quite as dominant as maybe it kind of seems like it is on paper. There's no doubt that McLaren does have the fastest car on paper and when it is in the right window, but Mercedes and Ferrari are not far behind. They are just lucky that Ferrari are in shambles and can't get their act together, and Mercedes is looking good and more consistent than in past years, but they're still not quite at that absolute peak that McLaren is was at. The McLaren 1-2 was almost gone because of Norris's brake issues, and that really could have cost them big time. Luckily, they had a pretty good advantage over Russell, as well as it being late in the race that Norris started having some of those brake issues. Now, the fact that there was a 1-2 for McLaren, they've won the opening 2 races of the year, and it's likely Piastri had a lot more pace in hand because he would have been managing his pace at the front to keep a hold of the tires. But we've seen with the sprint and in Australia showed that they are beatable and that not all hope is lost. Even if McLaren is the dominant team of the season, which it's looking like they might be, it looks like Piastri might be able to consistently challenge Norris, which would make for a really interesting title battle throughout the year. Piastri had an absolutely beautiful drive. He was just consistent, calm, and just really controlled the entire weekend. He was on par with Norris in Australia, and then he was ahead all weekend in China as well. His qualifying pace seems to be fixed, and that was kind of his main fault of last year. He just needs to keep going like this consistently, and he'll be able to challenge for the title. We've seen Norris have some inconsistency already, and if Piastri can be that consistent force, then he's really going to take the fight to Norris. Most people, including myself, have kind of left Piastri out of the talk of the title fight and just kind of leaving it up to Norris and Verstappen. But these first 2 races of the weekend have showed that Piastri is right there, and he needs to be talked about a little more in this title fight. Now let's talk on some of the teams down the order, starting out with Racing Bulls. They lost big points again today due to strategy. It wasn't quite as egregious as Australia because the 2-stop did seem the way to go, but they definitely lost out on some big points again. When the big teams, the big 4 teams mess up, the midfield needs to be taking advantage, and Racing Bulls are not currently taking advantage. It didn't help that Yuki did just have a random front wing that broke, but even then he was not set to score any points after doing the 2-stop, which was unfortunate for them. The car is quick. It's actually not too far off the sister team of Red Bull, but operationally they just need to sharpen up and get some more points on the board. Haas was my biggest surprise of the weekend. They were absolutely trash in Australia, and they had a complete turnaround here. Double point score, and now they're up the championship order after some big points between Ocon and Behrman. I don't even know where Ocon came in the race, because how he got to P5, obviously with the disqualifications, but I was just seeing so much of Behrman because he was really the one overtaking. He was about the only one that was overtaking for most of the race, and yeah, all of a sudden Ocon P5, Behrman P8, Haas scores some really big points. Now, was it just track characteristics that were helping them in China versus Australia, or did they figure out what was the problem? Really unsure, but they really turned it around here. Now we move on to Williams, and they are continuing to have a good start to the season. It was a truly classic Albon performance. It was really punchy, and he managed the tires super well. I loved on the radio, he said he was the best out there regarding like the tire wear, and that was quite the punchy statement from him, and he made it happen at the end. He did the 1-stop and successfully got some good points for Williams. He managed to out-survive everybody on the tires, and the car really wasn't as quick as it was in Australia, so it was a really great drive from Albon. Sainz is looking a bit less comfortable. He seems to not be able to get on top of the car in qualifying, and in the race he really wasn't quite able to do what Albon was able to do, since he doesn't have that feeling in the car right now. Luckily for him, he did manage to score a point thanks to the disqualifications. In contrast to Racing Bulls, Williams is A, having a competitive car, and B, just operationally performing really excellently. Next up, let's check up on the rookies, starting out with Kimi Antonelli. It was another great race from Kimi Antonelli. I mean, Russell is smashing him comparatively, but that's kind of to be expected, and it's going to take time for Antonelli to really properly get up to speed and start challenging Russell a bit more. But more importantly, Antonelli is just keeping it clean, calm, and just bagging the points for both weekends. He's keeping it the cleanest amongst the rookies, and he's really getting rewarded for it, and it was really another strong performance from him. Ali Behrman had an absolutely shocking Australian Grand Prix weekend, but it turned to absolute delight in China with a P8 with some good solid points, and it really reminded us why Behrman is so highly rated. He pulled off the 1-stop and got a couple bonus points for the disqualifications. Isaac Hadjar, last time out, had showed some promising signs, but overall it was a shocking Australian opening weekend. weekend for him because of his crash on the formation lap, but throughout the weekend at the Chinese Grand Prix, he did show those early promises of the Australian Grand Prix, and he managed to have a really solid weekend. He out-qualified Yuki in regular qualifying and was there or thereabouts in the race. He did finish ahead of Yuki in the race, but that was really just because Yuki had that front wing damage. Crazy enough, we can't count him out of being promoted to Red Bull in a swap with Lawson instead of Yuki, but I think it would be an absolute disaster, and I think it would be quite too soon. If it was too soon for Lawson, then it's going to be too soon for Hadjar, and I think he would get destroyed even worse than Yuki would. Just imagine the scenes if Yuki got passed again for the millionth time and they put Hadjar in that car. That would be absolute insanity. All right, next up, Liam Lawson, and I spoke on him earlier, but what an absolute shocker again. Double P20s in qualifying. He was only 12th in the race, and that was due to disqualifications. He would have been at least 2 spots back if it weren't for Duin's penalty and Yuki's wing falling off, and then even the Saubers had damage to their cars and spun, which would have pushed him back even more. But once again, he scored no points and was absolutely nowhere, and it's very, very possible that he might already get swapped out for Japan. Like in Australia, Jack Doohan had another promising weekend, but it was tainted with 2 penalties in the sprint race and the regular race for causing a collision. So not super ideal, not perfect weekends that he needs to be having. Doohan really was the most under pressure driver on the grid, I would say, with the arrival of Colapinto, of course, but I feel like the heat has been lifted a little bit off of him. Because he's been performing pretty decent. He's not absolutely disastrous. He does have promising signs. There just have been a couple wobbles like those points. So, that's certainly helping him. But B, Lawson is taking all of the pressure and limelight off of him by having a properly disastrous start to the season. So everybody's really talking about Lawson rather than Doohan at this point. So yeah, at this point, it's looking like Doohan might survive longer than Liam Lawson does. Last up, Gabriel Bortoleto. He just had kind of a messy weekend and a messy race. He had a lap 1 spin. There wasn't too much pace in the Sauber, and really he only finished ahead of Hulkenberg due to car damage. So overall, a pretty anonymous weekend for Bortoleto, but can give him some break since the Sauber wasn't particularly competitive this weekend. Now on to my predictions versus the race results. I only did the actual race predictions rather than the entire weekend. So taking a look at P5, I had Max Verstappen, which I think was a very fair prediction, and I think I was pretty accurate with that had Ferrari been a little more on top of things. But of course it wound up being Esteban Ocon, which who would have predicted that after last time out in Australia, how bad the Haas was for them to get P5 now. Absolute insanity. P4 I had George Russell, and it wound up being Max Verstappen, and he had a great pass on Leclerc and managed to reel in some good points with that P4 despite the Red Bull really not being the fastest car. So another really impressive drive from Verstappen as per usual. P3 I had Lando Norris, and it was George Russell bagging another P3, another podium, just keeping it super consistent. That Mercedes isn't quite on the par with McLaren, but it does seem to be more consistent than in past years, and Russell is performing extremely well, so he bagged another podium. P2 I had Lewis Hamilton, and that went super well, and it wound up actually being Lando Norris. Now, had Ferrari lived up to their sprint race promises, then I think that would have been a real possibility, but even before their disqualification, Ferrari just was not quite on the pace in the actual race, and it's possible Leclerc could have been up a little higher, had maybe they swapped position sooner or something like that, but the podium was not meant to be for Ferrari. Lando Norris had a bit of a damage limitation for the weekend. He was outperformed by Piastri all weekend, and for him to come P2 with those brake issues as well was definitely not a bad result for him, but I'm sure he's going to be wanting to bounce back sooner rather than later now that there's not that big of a points gap between him and Piastri. Now in P1, of course, I had Piastri. I thought he would hold on to the victory, and he did in fact hold on to that victory, and he was just flawless all race, kept it controlled and just managed the pace from out front and did exactly what he needed to and brought home his first win of the season as well as his third victory overall. Now for my overtake of the race, we have to go with Verstappen's overtake on Leclerc. It was really beautiful and Leclerc's tires were starting to fall off a bit. Verstappen was able to catch him. He went around the outside of turn 1, did a switch back to the outside of turn 2, and then just had the better line, better drive to be able to go down towards turn 3, where Leclerc did try to make a super late lunge, and I was surprised there was no contact, but then from then on, Verstappen had the pace to keep Leclerc behind. Next up, let's take a look at some memes of the race. Starting out with at LEC Lights, it's a text message thread. What time are you coming? Followed by just a picture of Liam Lawson. First person says, what does that even mean? And it means not showing up. Absolutely brutal on Liam Lawson, but quite true based on how he's performing so far. Ali Behrman was providing us basically the only entertainment of the race with his really awesome overtakes throughout the race, and he was the real meme of the race, just saying ciao every time he passed a driver, and it was particularly funny and just shocking when he was able to pass Lawson and he said ciao after that. That just shows how A, solid Behrman is, and B, how bad Lawson is performing right now. Next up, we have Lala with a nice Fernando Alonso meme. How many DNFs? 2. Poor Alonso is having a really poor start to the season. This next one from Tomo is really excellent, with both of the Ferrari drivers just looking absolutely disheveled. Cheer up, lads. Ocon P5. And that was at the expense of a double Ferrari disqualification. Terrible scenes for Ferrari, but great scenes for Ocon and Haas at the moment. And another one from F1 Troll Official. They always have some good memes, I feel, on Twitter, but it's the classic graphic of Lewis Hamilton at the racetrack there, and it says this race was crap. Classic. It was not the best race of all time, but hopefully it'll just be the low point of the season and we can only go up from here. Now finally, let's take a look at the championship picture after round 2 and after the first sprint race of the year. So of course we have Norris still leading the championship, and he is 8 points ahead of Verstappen, and Verstappen had a great race with damage limitation in a car that isn't so quick, so to be only 8 points behind Norris, not a bad start to the season at all. Piastri crawled back a lot of points and is now down just 10 points to Norris, so it is certainly within reaching arms for Piastri. 2 P3s and a P4 in the sprint mean that Russell is hanging on to third in the championship and having a really strong start to the year. Albon and Ocon pole vaulted themselves ahead of both of the Ferraris now, with Stroll also being ahead after the double Ferrari disqualification. Speaking on Ferrari and Williams are tied on points, which is absolutely insane going 2 races into the year. I don't expect that to continue, but Ferrari are not looking too good right now, and that's just pretty wild. Alpine are the only team now without any points, and they look to be a pretty decent midfield car, but they're just not able to take full advantage of it. They would have scored some points today had Gasly not got disqualified, of course. Mercedes are now second in the championship and not too far behind McLaren. They, like McLaren, have 2 drivers that are scoring some good points, just Antonelli isn't quite performing up to his peak as well as quite as high as Russell, so they are down in second. Verstappen is single-handedly keeping Red Bull in third. And then we have the sister team Racing Bulls at only 9th with 3 points, and they should be a lot higher after how good that car has looked so far to start the year. So that is the 2025 Chinese Grand Prix done and dusted. What a weekend it was. A lot of highs, a lot of lows, a lot of interesting talking points. Maybe not the most interesting race of all time, but we still have a lot to look forward to. We have a week off before a triple header. Quite the busy time of the year at the beginning of the season here, and we move on to the Japanese Grand Prix. So be on the lookout next time for my fast facts on the Japanese Grand Prix, and I look forward to that race coming up in a couple weeks time. If you are interested, please subscribe and give the video a like. Comment down below what you thought of the race, what you think is going to happen to Lawson, and do you think McLaren could win every single race this year? I don't imagine that happening, but anything is possible. If you are interested, give me a follow on social media. I'm on X as Last to First Reel. For first spelled F1RST, and I'm on Instagram as last to first, first spelled F1RST. So thank you all for tuning in, and I'll see you next time out for the Japanese Grand Prix.